On a windless night in late November 2019, the cold slipped through the narrow alleys of Manuel, Valencia. Beneath the dim, yellow streetlights, Marta Calvo walked with a tired gait, her hand gripping the phone that still showed the message she had sent her mother, the address of where she was going. She was heading to a white party arranged through an app, the kind of meeting her friends half joked about, half feared. For Marta, it was a chance to earn some money to help her family. Yet it was also a gamble she herself didn't want to acknowledge. That night, a thin moonlight washed over the worn rooftops, turning the alley into something cold and still, like a faded photograph. Marta stopped in front of a wooden door, taking a deep breath to push away the familiar unease. Inside was a man she only knew through a few exchanged messages. Behind her was the home where her mother waited, where bills and quiet burdens kept piling on her shoulders. Thinking of her family, Marta knocked. The knocks echoed sharply, followed by the soft click of a lock shifting. As the door opened, a harsh bleach smell hit her, making her hesitate. The flickering fluorescent light overhead sputtered, revealing stained walls and a floor so clean it reflected the shape of every step. The man invited her in, deeper into the house, and handed her a glass of water, assuring her that everything was safe. Fun. Marta tried to stay calm, but the lights suddenly went out. Darkness dropped as fast as a trapdoor. She felt her body sway, her heartbeat pounding, her breath shortening. Whatever she had just drunk brought a strange sensation. Her throat burned dry, her hands trembled, her mind blurred as if being pulled away from itself. She tried to say she wasn't feeling well, but the words that slipped out were only faint, broken sounds. In the closed-off room, Marta realized she was losing control, and that the dark alley behind her moments ago might have been her last chance to turn back, a chance fate never let her grasp in time. Before we go any deeper into what happened behind that door, let's take a step back and ask ourselves a simple question. Are you in a safe place right now? Maybe you're listening to this story in your familiar room, on your bed, on a bus ride home, or during your lunch break at work. Those ordinary moments that make people believe tragedy exists only in newspapers or in films. But sometimes, all it takes is one invitation that looks harmless, one meeting arranged too quickly through a phone screen to tilt the entire trajectory of someone's life. What would you do if one day you received that invitation, paired with the promise of quick money or an enticing, fun night out? Are you sure you would say no? Or would you reassure yourself that you're still in control, that it's only this one time? Now, try to imagine the feeling of stepping into a stranger's house late at night, simply because you thought you were being careful, because you sent the address to a loved one, because you turned on your location sharing, because you believed, if anything happens, Mom will know. These layers of safety we rely on, messages, calls, shared locations, are sometimes nothing more than fragile threads, unable to hold anyone back when something truly terrible breaks through. And that is why the story of Marta Calvo is not merely a gruesome crime. It is a reminder of the thin, fragile line between a sense of safety and a harsh, unforgiving reality. Marta Calvo was born and raised in Estivella, a small town tucked beside the Turia River, where people still call each other by friendly nicknames, and no one stays a stranger for long. Her father was a construction worker, leaving for the site at dawn before the sky even turned blue, coming home with calloused hands and the scent of cement lingering on his clothes. Her mother worked as a cashier at the local supermarket, standing long shifts behind the register, accustomed to counting every coin and watching customers weigh every purchase. Marta was the eldest child, with a younger brother in the dreamy limbo between adolescence and adulthood. From a young age, Marta learned to grow up faster than her peers, to give in, to take care of herself, to tuck her own dreams away so her parents wouldn't have one more worry. At school, friends remembered Marta for her bright, clear smile and the way she was always carrying a stack of notebooks. She wasn't the kind who stood out in the crowd, but she was the student teacher trusted to collect papers, help tidy the classroom, or stay behind to arrange teaching materials. Her brown hair was usually tied neatly behind her head, Her old backpack patched several times, and her worn-out sneakers carried her from home to school and to the small tutoring sessions she took on the side. For Marta, success meant nothing grand, just a diploma, a stable job, an income steady enough that she wouldn't feel embarrassed every time she opened the electricity bill. These dreams might sound small, but for a working-class family, they were everything. During her university years, Marta rented a tiny room near the train station, a space with cheap posters on the wall, a cluttered desk stacked with pedagogy textbooks, notebooks, and English learning materials. By day, she went to class, took meticulous notes, and completed every assignment she was given. At night, she tutored a few children in the neighborhood, teaching them the same math problems and paragraphs she herself once struggled with. On weekends, she worked part-time at a children's clothing shop, folding shirts while mentally preparing lesson plans or thinking about upcoming exams. Every bit of money she earned was carefully recorded in a notebook: rent, transport, meals. At the end of each month, she gathered whatever was left and sent it back home to Estevella, sometimes to help with the electricity bill, sometimes to add to the grocery budget, sometimes to buy her mother a small item she had always looked at but rarely bought for herself. Love, for Marta, had once come and gone like a long passing breeze. She had been in a relationship for several years, one she once thought might lead to marriage, but it ended quietly. Marta never liked to call herself lonely, but in messages to her best friend, she had once written that she hoped someday, when her finances were more stable and her parents were less burdened, she could allow herself to love again. By November 2019, Marta was working at a local bar, mixing drinks, wiping down tables, exchanging polite smiles with customers. Near midnight, a man approached the counter. He spoke softly, with a friendly tone, asked about her work, her family, and seemed especially attentive when Marta mentioned wanting to earn a little extra money to help her household. At first, their conversation sounded like the countless harmless small talks she had endured during her shifts. But the longer they talked, the sharper Jorge's proposal became. A discreet, white party. Only a few guests, cash payment, no noise, no drama. He made it sound like a harmless routine of adulthood, something everyone does in nightlife circles. Marta hesitated, a quiet instinct nudging her to refuse. But Jorge spoke smoothly, assuring her that nothing would get out of hand, that she could leave any time she felt uncomfortable. When he placed 100 euros in her palm, with a smile that seemed like a promise, reality surfaced again. The stack of bills at home, the hoodie her younger brother liked, the carton of milk her mother had debated buying for days. Marta reminded herself that she had already sent her location to her mother, already texted the address, and already planned to stay sober. All of that sounded like a safety net thick enough, and in the end, she agreed. When she left the bar, the night had grown colder. The wind swept through the narrow streets, carrying the damp scent of stone walls and moisture drifting in from the nearby fields. Marta tightened her coat around herself, walking and sending a short message to her mother, reassuring her that she was fine, just meeting a friend. She didn't know whether her mother would see it in time, but the act alone made her feel she wasn't completely alone in the world. Around 1 a.m., Marta arrived at house number 9 on San Juan Bautista Street. The house looked so ordinary, it was almost forgettable. Gray-white walls, a wooden door, several windows covered tightly with curtains, a faint light leaking through as if afraid of being seen. For many people, that would be the moment to turn back. For Marta, it was the moment she told herself, "I'm already here. Just get it over with and go home." Marta knocked, and as we have already seen, the door opened to a chain of events that would never be undone. What exactly happened after she drank that glass of water is something only two people truly knew. One who would never return, and the other who would later claim in an icy, emotionless voice that everything was just an accident. The most specific details of what happened in that room are neither necessary nor appropriate to imagine. It's enough to know that after that night, Marta was erased from this world in a way so brutal that no intact body remained for her parents to hold one last time. The next morning, the outside world continued as usual. People went to work, students headed to school, market stalls were set up, conversations blurred into each other. But inside the Calvo family home in Estivella, a quiet void began to open. Marta didn't text, as she normally would. At first, they thought maybe she'd stayed at a friend's place or gotten busy with work. When phone calls went unanswered, once, then twice, the air inside the house grew heavier. Her loved ones tried to comfort each other, tried to find reasonable explanations for the unusual silence, but slowly, unease began to take over. 2 days passed in waiting, in unanswered calls. Then, on the evening of November 8th, Marta's father suddenly received a message from an unknown number. It contained only 2 words: "Help me." No picture or location. Nothing attached. A message stranded in darkness, like a hand reaching out with no way to know who waited on the other end. The family froze. They immediately thought of Marta, but no one understood why she would message from a different number, or whether she had been forced to use someone else's phone. That message shattered the fragile hope that she had simply partied too hard and forgotten to call home. The next morning, Marta's mother, Marisol Buron, decided she would not wait another minute. She looked again at the last message her daughter had sent on WhatsApp, the one containing a specific address, number 9, San Juan Bautista, Manuel. She got in her car and drove straight there, her chest heavy as if weighed down by stones. When she knocked hard on the door, it opened slightly, revealing a middle-aged man with a drained, disheveled appearance, his eyes cold as if he had just woken from a nightmare. That man was Jorge Ignacio Palma. She asked directly about her daughter. "Where is Marta? She came here last night. She sent me this address." He looked at her, shook his head, and curtly replied that he didn't know who Marta was, that she must have the wrong house. Then he shut the door, fast and firm, as if to block any further questions. Standing in the narrow hallway, Marisol understood 2 things. Her daughter had been here, and this man was lying. She turned around and went straight to the Guardia Civil to report Marta missing. When the Guardia Civil received the report, an emergency search operation was immediately activated. The first address they went to was number 9. The door opened again, this time under police authority. As soon as investigators stepped inside, the strong scent of chlorine hit them, as if someone had tried to scrub every surface until the smell clung to the walls. The kitchen, the bathroom, the floors, everything was far too clean for a house someone actually lived in, especially for a man living alone. Old marks, high-touch areas had been scrubbed until they lost color. But no cleaning agent is perfect. On the sofa, they noticed faint smudges, remnants of something that had dried and been painstakingly scrubbed away. The K9 dog sniffed and paused repeatedly around that area, barking softly, signaling that something had been there, something that had been removed in a way that was not natural. Police did not find Marta, but they understood very clearly that she had been inside this house, and had left it in an abnormal state. From that point on, the case was no longer a simple disappearance, but a full-scale criminal investigation. Police followed the small traces Jorge left behind, his contradictory statements, the timeline of his movements, the places he frequented. One suspicious detail quickly emerged. Jorge's car, practically an extension of himself, had suddenly vanished. Investigators discovered it had been taken to a scrapyard in El Puig for dismantling, right around the time Marta disappeared. At the scrapyard, police managed to stop the process just before the vehicle was completely crushed. For a man already under suspicion in the disappearance of a young woman, rushing to dispose of his car was almost impossible to view as coincidence. That piece of the puzzle, combined with the heavy smell of cleaning chemicals and his lie to Marta's mother, placed the name Jorge Ignacio Palma at the very center of the investigation. Outside, Manuel and Estivella sank into worry. Marta's photo was printed and posted on walls, on shop windows, on lampposts. Her face became an image impossible to forget for anyone who followed Spanish news at the time. Groups of volunteers coordinated with authorities to comb through fields, trails, riverbanks, anywhere a body could be left. The media reported relentlessly, analyzing every clue, interviewing relatives and friends. Marisol appeared in front of the cameras with swollen, red eyes, saying she only wanted to know where her daughter was. For her, the worst thing wasn't hearing that Marta might be gone. It was living each day with a cruel uncertainty, not knowing which side of the line between life and death her daughter stood on. Meanwhile, Jorge vanished. He left his house, cut all contact, didn't return to work, and abandoned his usual phone numbers. The Guardia Civil issued a regional manhunt, sending his image to checkpoints, lodging facilities, hospitals. Many theories emerged. He had fled into the woods, crossed a border, or managed to leave Europe entirely. The longer he remained missing, the heavier the question grew in Marta's family's minds. If he had done nothing wrong, why would he run? Each day, without news, mixed hope and despair together, wearing down the strength of those who waited. Nearly a month later, on December 4th, 2019, when everyone had grown exhausted from fruitless searches, Jorge Ignacio Palma unexpectedly walked into the Guardia Civil station in Carcassonne to surrender. His face was gaunt, his eyes dull, like someone who hadn't slept in days. But what he brought with him was not closure. It was a story both overly detailed and devoid of conscience. He claimed Marta had died accidentally during the party after using drugs, that he panicked, that her death was an accident, and he never intended to kill her. He mentioned having thought about suicide, then choosing instead to cut her body into pieces and dispose of it in trash containers across multiple towns so that no one would find her. His confession shocked all of Spain. People were not only faced with the horror of a young woman losing her life after a single meeting, but with an even more devastating reality, that her remains might never be found for a proper burial. In the weeks that followed, authorities carried out one of the region's most complex and expensive search operations, focusing on the waste processing plants in Guadassuar and the locations where Jorge claimed to have dumped the remaining parts of Marta. Excavators, conveyor belts, and massive piles of garbage were overturned. Workers in white protective suits walked back and forth between mountains of waste, hoping to find any bone fragment or piece of evidence. But the volume of garbage was so immense, constantly being moved, crushed, and processed, that it became impossible to control. In the end, they had to accept a brutal truth. Marta's body had almost certainly been ground up and destroyed by the waste management system, no longer intact enough to identify. The only thing left to do was search for microscopic traces in the one place she had last remained, house number 9. The investigators returned to that house with a determination entirely different from the first day. This time, they relied not just on the naked eye, but on specialized equipment. They dismantled drain pipes, pried up sections of tile, scraped residue from inside the plumbing, and collected samples from corners no one would normally look at. Forensic results later showed Marta's DNA in several areas of the house, despite the heavy cleaning. Tiny tissue fragments, microtraces, undeniable proof that she had died there. There was no body, but there was Jorge's confession and the DNA traces, enough to turn a mysterious disappearance into a murder case with a confirmed victim, time, and location. The list of no-body homicide cases in the world grew by one more name, Marta Calvo Buron. Only at this point, when Marta's death was legally established despite the absence of a body, did the investigation begin to shift in a broader direction. Who exactly was Jorge Ignacio Palma? And was Marta truly his only victim? Deeper background checks revealed he was not some ordinary man who happened to spiral after a party gone wrong. Jorge was born in 1981 in Ibagué, Colombia, and had been involved in drug trafficking networks from a young age. In 2004, the Guardia Civil had listed him as part of a drug smuggling group in Extremadura, where he acted as a transporter moving narcotics from Algeciras to Llerena. He had admitted in court to participating in these operations and was later convicted on drug-related charges. These sentences accustomed him to the shadows of the criminal world and taught him how to hide, manipulate, and survive in the gray zones of the law. When he later moved to Spain, Jorge quickly disguised himself as a normal working man. Neighbors said he lived quietly, occasionally had strange guests coming and going, but nothing that seemed alarming. He rented a house, paid his bills, and maintained loose connections with people around him, just enough to keep anyone from asking questions. That world, calm on the surface but rotten underneath, was the perfect environment for a criminal who could hide in plain sight for years. And when police dug deeper into the months before Marta disappeared, they uncovered a terrifying pattern. Repeated Fiesta Blanca gatherings, young women, mostly sex workers, and the use of highly pure cocaine in an especially dangerous manner. Between mid-2018 and November 2019, Jorge was accused of luring and assaulting at least 10 women, most of them sex workers. He negotiated prices, arranged meetings in rented apartments, and behaved like a regular, harmless client. Once inside, he began his game, using pure cocaine not just for consumption, but introducing it directly into women's bodies through the vagina or anus. He often hid how dangerous the method was, or only vaguely mentioned it. Experts later confirmed he fully understood the lethal risks and even seemed to derive pleasure from watching a woman's body collapse. Two of the most prominent victims besides Marta were Arlene Ramos and Lady Marcela Vargas. Arlene, 32, a Brazilian woman, was found in critical condition and died after a week in a coma. She had attended a Fiesta Blanca with Jorge and was brought to the hospital suffering cocaine shock. Lady Marcela, 26, a Colombian mother of two, also died after a similar encounter in June 2019. Both deaths were initially dismissed as drug-related accidents until investigators linked them to Marta's disappearance. The pattern widened when surviving victims began to come forward. At least 6 women escaped alive after Jorge subjected them to the same cruel game. They testified how he gained their trust, promised a new experience, then watched coldly as their bodies reacted violently. Many felt their hearts race uncontrollably, their vision darken, and their consciousness slip away. Some survived only because they were rushed to the hospital in time for emergency detoxification. Criminologists examined the pattern and labeled Jorge a depredador lethal, a lethal predator with serial killer tendencies. His actions weren't impulsive or accidental. They were calculated, repeated, and methodical. Each encounter followed the same structure: initiation, drug insertion, physical collapse, and indifference. Investigators concluded that Jorge intentionally pushed women to the brink of death. The consistency made the case one of the most disturbing in recent Spanish criminal history. The trial began in June 2022 in Valencia and immediately drew national attention. Jorge appeared in court wearing a simple shirt, alternating between hanging his head and staring blankly at the room. At strategic moments, he cried when his lawyer mentioned accident or remorse. But the courtroom remained unmoved. Prosecutors presented receipts for saws, cleaning supplies, and large plastic bags purchased during the days Marta disappeared. Forensic experts added that her DNA was found in the drains and on surfaces aggressively scrubbed. Survivors testified in trembling voices about the moments he toyed with their lives. Their stories aligned seamlessly with the physical evidence, revealing a chilling behavioral pattern. Jorge's knowledge of drugs and his experience concealing evidence only reinforced the prosecution's case. By the end, the portrait of a consistent, cold, and manipulative offender was undeniable. The court faced not a man overwhelmed by a sudden accident, but a predator who perfected a deadly ritual. Before the court, Jorge continued to cling to the accident narrative. At one point, when his lawyer asked directly, "Did you kill Marta, Arlene, or Lady Marcela?" he answered absolutamente no, as if trying to blame everything on the drugs themselves. He portrayed himself as an addict, flawed but not evil, claimed he collapsed emotionally when Marta fell unconscious, said he considered suicide because he could not bear the guilt. However, when prosecutors asked why, if he was so devastated, he still managed to calmly buy equipment, dismember the body, dispose of it in multiple locations, scrub the house clean, fabricate stories, and then disappear for nearly a month. He had no answer. The contradiction between the panicked man he tried to depict and his methodical, organized actions became one of the central arguments at trial. On July 22, 2022, after weeks of deliberation, the jury delivered its verdict. Jorge Ignacio Palma was found guilty of the murders of Marta Calvo, Arliene Ramos, and Lady Marcela Vargas, along with numerous charges related to sexual assault and intentional harm against the 6 surviving women. The entire white party pattern, injecting cocaine into victims' bodies, was officially recognized as deliberate conduct, not an accident. He was sentenced to a total of 159 years and 11 months in prison, in addition to financial compensation to the victims' families, including Marta's. Although Spanish law limits the actual maximum time he can serve, the symbolic weight of the sentence was clear. Society regarded this as a series of exceptionally grave crimes perpetrated by a serial killer. Yet for Marta's family, a 159-year sentence did not equate to true justice. Her mother, Marisol, publicly expressed disappointment that the court did not impose prisión permanente revisable, a form of revisable life imprisonment, essentially allowing the offender to be kept behind bars for life if still deemed dangerous. She called the sentence an insult to the victims' families because despite the hundreds of years on paper, the law still places a cap on actual prison time. To her, someone who could kill 3 women, nearly kill 6 more, and even dismember a victim deserves no conceivable future of returning to society. The story, therefore, did not end with the 2022 verdict. The plaintiffs, representing the victims' families, filed an appeal, requesting that the Spanish Supreme Court reconsider the sentence. They argued that current law allows the application of prisión permanente revisable to asesinos en serie, serial killers who murder multiple victims within one criminal sequence, even if all convictions occur in a single trial. Legal debate centered on the interpretation of Article 140.2 of the Penal Code, whether 3 prior murder convictions were required, or whether it could be applied within the same trial if multiple killings were proven. In September 2024, the Spanish Supreme Court issued a landmark decision. It partially upheld the appeal, ruling that with 3 murders proven, Marta's being the 3rd, and with a repeated crime pattern, applying prisión permanente revisable was fully appropriate. The court affirmed that this was precisely the type of case lawmakers envisioned when creating this punishment. Serial killers, driven by a compulsion to kill, and showing absolute disregard for human life. In addition to raising the sentence to the highest possible form, the Supreme Court increased the compensation Jorge must pay to Marta's parents. Even so, Marta's body has never been found, and that remains the most brutal truth. If the story stopped there, it would unintentionally place a cruel man at the center of attention when the person most deserving of remembrance is Marta herself. She was not a headline-labeled case or disappearance, but a living human being, an older sister patiently tutoring her younger brother, a young woman who kept careful notes of every expense, a daughter who reminded herself to try a little harder so her parents would suffer less. When those small details are placed next to the image of a house reeking of bleach or waste plants being torn apart, the contrast between how she lived and how her life was taken becomes painfully stark. The story of Marta Calvo, in a sense, generated an impact far beyond the legal sphere. It forced society to confront difficult questions: the safety of women in app-arranged encounters, the realities of commercial sex work, and how the justice system treats victims when their bodies are never found. It also made the public reconsider how media report such cases. Whether we unintentionally mythologize the killer by dissecting every gesture and every word, while summarizing the victim's life in only a few lines. Each time we mention the Marta Calvo case, what do we choose to focus on? The legal maneuvers, the garbage heap searched, or the face of a 25-year-old woman smiling in a family photograph? The answer each person gives in some way reflects what we value when confronted with tragedies like this. The more important question is this: how do we reduce the chances of someone like Marta falling into the sights of someone like him? How do we make sure that when a woman sends her location to her mother, it is not just a fragile, comforting gesture, but something that genuinely helps protect her? That could mean tightening control over offenders with histories of violence and drug-related crimes, raising awareness about the risks of app-arranged encounters, and giving women more tools and more space to say no without judgment or financial pressure. After years of working with police, courts, and lawyers, Marta's family chose a difficult path, turning their pain into a voice. Her mother appeared before the media many times, not to recount gruesome details, but to remind people that her daughter was a hard-working, kind young woman who deserved to be remembered for how she lived, not only for how she died. She said that every time someone speaks Marta's name with respect, it keeps her alive a little longer in someone's heart. They fought back with memory, refusing to let her name be buried alongside the garbage bags he discarded in the night. Perhaps the only consolation in this story is that Marta, even though her body was taken from her, left behind something Jorge Ignacio Palma could never touch: the quiet kindness of a young person who always thought of others before herself. He could erase physical traces with chlorine, grind her bones through waste processing machines, lie coldly in court, yet he could not touch the memories of those she helped, the ones she lent bus money to, the ones she walked through math problems with, the ones she hugged tightly when their own lives were falling apart. Somewhere outside the courtroom frame, people still remember her in the simplest ways: lighting a candle, keeping a photo, retelling her story as a way to resist forgetting. And perhaps, whenever we are about to walk through an unfamiliar door, or consider trading our sense of safety for an opportunity that seems easy, remembering the name Marta Calvo, not as the title of a case, but as the name of a human being, may be enough to make us pause and look more closely into the darkness ahead.